In my old hometown of Chicago, there is a World's Fair in 1893. It was called the Columbian Exposition. The purpose of the fair was to celebrate America's rise to the status of a world power. The theme of the fair was the Columbus Voyage of 1492. A huge Venetian-style theme park was built up on 60 acres of marshland south of the city. Reporters dubbed this extravagant movie set the Great White City. With very few rare exceptions, they were also entirely fakes. The glorious structures looked like carved marble on the outside. However, they consisted of wood and steel frames that had been covered over with cement and paper mache. They didn't last more than a few years after the fair had ended. Columbus was picked as a champion of the fair because historians were promoting the idea that he was picked by God to pave the way for the commercial development of the American wilderness. The premier slogan of the era was Manifest Destiny, and Columbus was regarded as the embodiment of that slogan. Spain sent 3 replicas of the Columbus ships across the Atlantic to participate in the festivities. The Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria drew crowds of visitors who wanted to share in the thrill of discovering new lands. Norwegians sent a replica of a Viking ship claiming that Leif Erikson had been to America almost 500 years before Columbus. However, historians denounced the Norwegians as ethnocentric spoilers who were trying to steal the credit that belonged to God's chosen hero, that is, to Columbus. The scientific basis for the Columbus hoopla was based on the research and writing of a highly respected Swiss botanist by the name of Alphonse de Candolle. He published a book called The Origin of Cultivated Plants in 1886 and again in 1890, right before the Columbian Exposition. This book praised Columbus for bringing all the important Old World plants to the Americas in 1492, and it also gave the Genovese navigator credit for bringing all the New World plants back to Spain in 1493. From this point onward, said de Candolle, all the vital crop plants spread around the world. Supposedly, the most important plant that Columbus brought across the seas was maize. De Candolle paid lip service to the notion that scientists should do adequate research in the field in order to test the validity of their theories. He reasoned that if anybody had beat Columbus in crossing the seas, it would have been the Egyptians. He further surmised that if the Egyptians had brought back maize, they would have included maize plants in all of their tombs and temples. And so he made a trip to Cairo, and he saw nothing that looked to him like maize. And it's no wonder he saw murals that had maize if he looked at this one from the Ptolemaic era. The plants were probably intended to represent the magical corn of Osiris, but admittedly, they don't look anything at all like maize plants. The Columbian Exposition solidified the power of the doctrinaire academics who believed that the Americas were isolated from the Old World contact until after Columbus. About 26 million people attended the fair, and they witnessed the first major display of electric light in the Ferris wheel. Thus, the heroic image of Columbus as a divinely chosen discoverer was welded to advances in technology. In the late 1880s, textbooks portrayed Columbus as God's champion, basking in holy light. Most American historians praised Columbus as God's chosen instrument for starting the American nation, proving that the earth was round, and for introducing Burma shave and billboards all across the American Corn Belt, from Indiana to Nebraska. Textbooks frequently began the American history story with Columbus, even though the Spanish admiral never set foot on any mainland that later became the United States. Many of the illustrations showed Columbus with a map in hand as he directed his crew on the first historic voyage in 1492. Here's a copy of one of the maps that was available to Columbus. It actually still hangs on a wall in the library of his hometown of Genoa. This version was painted on vellum in 1457. Here's a schematic of the Genoese planisphere. It shows a coastline at the arrow that looks very much like the east coast of the Americas. In 1992, the Orthodox American historians had yet another excuse to propagandize their hero and their defunct paradigm of New World cultural isolation. This was the 500th anniversary of the Columbus voyage. The focal point of the festivities was a special exhibit that was mounted at the Smithsonian Institution, seen here in Washington, D.C. The Smithsonian exhibit was called Seeds of Change, and once more, Columbus was praised for bringing the first maize from the New World back to Spain in 1493. In Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, there are many monuments that have been left by futuristic thinkers. The purpose of these monuments is to help people make a mental leap into thinking about the future based on science and the world community, and not upon the doomsday philosophy of fundamentalist prophets. The guiding eye in the pyramid on the back of the nation's seal and on money in everyone's pocket or billfold is supposed to be a reminder of the lofty ideals upon which the nation was ordained. The motto, Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new world order is ordained, is supposed to remind us that the American government is not built up on the old model of a tyrant dictating from the top, but instead it is built up from the bottom, by the people, and for an eternity into the future. Is the past the key to the future? Well, I think it can be. When I was a graduate student in anthropology at the University of Wisconsin, my major professor had above his doorway a big banner that said, "Those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it." It was a quote from the philosopher George Santayana, and the presumption was that if we remember what happened in the past, if we teach our history, and if we learn our history, we won't be making the same mistakes over and over again, because we'll know better. And so when I was a graduate student in anthropology, I looked around me, and it seemed to me that we were, as a society, making the same mistakes over and over and over again. So I went up to my major professor and I said, well, George Santayana had a point that we should know what happened in the past. But the question I asked him was this: but what if the past that we remember is wrong? Then our only way out of this predicament is to fix the history. And the history that is currently being taught in the schools, the history that says, among other things, that Columbus brought the first corn, or Indian corn, across the Atlantic Ocean, is totally wrong. And historians have been teaching this in school for over a century, which suggests to me that the historians and the anthropologists have been essentially out to lunch for that period of time. I think that conferences like this on the internet can be a step in the right direction. I'd like to thank Steve St. Clair, the Sinclair family, Wayne May, Ancient American Magazine, Rick Osmond, the Oopaloopa Cafe, and Blog Talk Radio for making this conference possible. I'd also like to invite you to stick with us for the oncoming programs. There's a lot of new discoveries that we're going to be seeing today. And from these new discoveries, hopefully, we'll have new keys to the future. Thank you for being with us. I'm Gunnar Thompson.